Again at leaders' questions today and with a private member's motion tomorrow. And there's a number of things we want to say, most of which are contained in the private members we'll be putting into the Taoiseach today. First of all, that it is really outrageous that the government are failing to act against what is, by any reasonable assessment of the horror that's been visited on Gaza, a genocide. And we will be reminding the government, and this is an issue that hasn't really surfaced in the debates that we've had so far, that they have obligations under the Genocide Convention to act to prevent a genocide, or to act and sanction any state that is engaged in a genocide. And the legal definition of genocide is set down by the Genocide Convention, very, very clearly applies to what Israel is now doing to the Palestinian people. And the failure of our government and other governments, there's more than 140 countries in the world are signatories to this Genocide Convention, but have failed to do anything whatsoever. And people should be aware that very senior people in the United Nations, for example, have resigned over this, because they are absolutely disgusted at the failure of UN member states to sanction or take any action over what fits all the definitions of a genocide being conducted by Israel in Gaza. We will also be, as part of the motion, being raising the issue of Shannon Airport and calling for the US military to be removed from Shannon Airport, for them not to be allowed to continue to use Shannon Airport, while the United States continues to support the murderous genocidal assault by Israel on Gaza. We think, first of all, that that should be done simply on the grounds that the United States have given cover and legitimacy to Israel's mass murder in Gaza, and have pledged support, are giving military and financial support to Israel to conduct this massacre, but also because we would have concerns that there are no inspections being done at Shannon Airport to ensure that weapons are not being transported on US military aircraft through Shannon and this country en route to Israel to be used to slaughter Palestinians in Gaza. So that will be another important issue we're raising. Something that, just to add to our list of concerns in the absolutely shameful failure of the government to kind of respond in the way we feel, and we think the Irish people want the government to respond on what's happening in Gaza, is the decision of Micheál Martin to participate in an Israeli propaganda exercise by going to Israel and being filmed essentially by the Israeli government officials in what was, Israeli propaganda trying to justify what they are doing to the people of Gaza. And we think, frankly, it was quite shameful that Micheál Martin did it. People have seen the video on independent.ie of the meeting with the Israeli mayor, where, quite frankly, I thought Micheál Martin allowed himself and this country to be humiliated by the Israeli mayor who is justifying this slaughter and effectively sort of bullying an Irish government representative. I think it was pretty shameful and disappointing. And what we believe is necessary is that the government should actually be standing up against this stuff and imposing sanctions, as they are required to do under the Genocide Convention that they've ratified, to put sanctions on all Israeli government's military officials, including the ambassador. So that is again included in our motion to get the US military out of Shannon, and the motion is also calling for support for the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. So we'll be raising those today at Leaders and at the PMB tomorrow. There'll also be a demonstration. We would expect several thousand people on the demonstration again tomorrow at 6 o'clock prior to the vote taking place, and we urge all those in opposition and in government to consider the urgency of this terrible situation in Gaza and to support that motion. Just lastly, I just want to mention another issue. Tomorrow evening also, people before profit have amendments into the finance bill around the very significant amount of financial contribution that we give to the Irish film industry every year through tax relief, Section 481 tax relief. And I've just come from a briefing where we were listening to the stories of actors, performers, writers and directors who have been protesting very vociferously over the last year or two over the fact that they are being forced by the film producers in this country, who receive about 100 million in taxpayers' money a year, and that's set to increase in the finance bill by another 50 million, but who are forcing actors, writers and performers and directors to sign buyout contracts where they sign away their right to future royalties and residuals on the money that those films actually make down the line, and essentially are working on contracts that are way inferior to what similar creative people would get either in Britain or the United States. And people will be conscious there's been a huge industrial action in the United States over similar and related issues, and we have myself and Labour Party and Sinn Féin all have amendments into the finance bill looking for this issue to be addressed, and also the question of crew, not just the actors and performers, but also crew who essentially are very, very vulnerable to blacklisting, do not even know in many cases who their employer is, have no real recourse on employment rights because of the way the film industry is structured. So, and all of this follows a report by the Budget Scrutiny Committee, which I'm on, which produced a report saying, yes, we want to increase the investment in the Irish film industry, but it has to be strictly conditional on proper conditions of employment for the writers, the actors, the directors and the film crew, and that is not happening, and there is very, very bad treatment essentially of the people who help make our film industry work and happen. So I just want to draw your attention to it. It's an important issue for those working in the Irish film industry.
Richard, you hardly think it's coincidental that the same week that Micheál Martin went to Israel, that after weeks of Irish citizens not being put on lists actually get out, that suddenly when he announced a visit that nearly everyone got out?
Well, it's interesting that the people who have been released, one of whom spoke at the demonstration on Saturday, were very, very clear that in their view the reason they had got out is because of the scale of protests in this country. And I think if...
Do you really think Israel, though, were watching the scale of protests in this country?
I absolutely think Israel are worried about them, and they are very, very worried about sanctions and BDS, and that is why, for example, and people should really understand what this state is like, but for example, you can be imprisoned in Israel for supporting the boycott, sanctions and divestment movement. Now, why would they do that if they weren't afraid of it? They are absolutely concerned about the level of popular protest, and if there's any prospect of even a limited truce over the coming days or ceasefire, it is because of their fear that the governments who to date in the West have essentially supported and green-lighted their massacre in Gaza are coming under serious, serious pressure and are worried that they're losing the dressing room in terms of public support. So I absolutely am convinced of that. Yeah.
Do you think it's coincidental that they were released when Micheál Martin was going over there?
I just said what I think. I think it is...
No, but I'm just asking you, do you think it's coincidental? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I mean, I think they were holding Irish people hostage, right, for the last number of weeks when they'd released other people. So Israel was holding the Irish people hostage. That's what they're doing. But do I think that we should sort of kowtow to a regime that would take people hostage? No, I don't. I think we should take sanctions against them. And if you were asking me what is more likely to bring Israel to heel and to stop the massacre and to stop taking people hostage, I think it is sanctions and doing what we did with apartheid South Africa. And by the way, one thing we'll be mentioning today, and again, I hope we can start at least this debate. I'm not asking you all to agree with me on the question of genocide, but this is being discussed internationally, and it's not being discussed here. We're still in a narrative that Israel is engaged in some sort of self-defense, right? When there are very serious people at an international level are saying this is genocide. Now, at the very least, we need to start that discussion. And the deputy Speaker of the Israeli Parliament last week said, we are being too humane in Gaza, we should burn it, right? Is the Deputy Speaker of the Israeli Parliament. These people are frankly off the Richter scale in their, murderous intent. And I think we should start to recognise that, and we should impose sanctions, just as people were very, very quick to argue for sanctions against Russia.
With respect, Richard, it's not what I asked you. I asked you, do you think it was coincidental that the hostages were released the same couple of days that Micheál Martin was over there?
Do I think it's coincidental?
Yeah.
If you're asking me, do I think that the government's diplomatic strategy is what released the hostages? No, I don't. Right? I don't think that.
Richard, your view on the conflict is obviously pretty well known at this stage, but the private member's motion that you brought before the Chamber tomorrow, I think it's 1,870 words, and not a single one of those words is Hamas. Now, I know you find the equivocating and the equivalizing, I know you find that tedious and sort of a little unnecessary, and that's fair enough, but do you not think that in a motion that comprehensive, that even one line to acknowledge that Israel, although in your eyes overreacting to a gross extent, that this is prompted by a gross act of domestic terrorism, and that for even that to be acknowledged?
No, see, I don't. I don't think this started on October the 7th. And by the way, no Palestinian thinks that, and virtually nobody in the Middle East do it. But there is a government narrative, and sadly it's being reflected in the Irish media, that wants to start the clock on this horrific situation on October the 7th. But nobody in Palestine believes it started on October the 7th, because they were being killed with impunity long before October the 7th. They were having their land stolen long before October the 7th. This was the deadliest year for Palestinians before October the 7th. So why do people think it started on October the 7th? It just is beyond me why that narrative persists. I understand why Israel wants to promote that narrative, but nobody in the Middle East believes that. And to be honest, if you look at the scale of the protests in this country, I don't think most Irish people believe it. We are seeing a level of public protest and anger because people know Israel is a state that is built on ethnic cleansing and violence and the murderous denial of Palestinian rights, and that it has been doing this long before. I mean, will you even focus on the fact that Netanyahu went to the UN General Assembly in September with a map that had erased Gaza and the West Bank from it? Do you think that's significant? Why did nobody cover that? Or when the opposition again and again put motions in the Dáil over the last 2 years, People for Profit very prominently did so, by and large ignored. By and large ignored. Where we tried to draw people's attention to reports like the UN Human Rights Watch, like the Amnesty International reports, like the UN Special Rapporteur's report, all saying that there were war crimes and crimes against humanity being committed by Israel before October the 7th. So our motion is trying to remind people this horror all predated October the 7th. So we don't accept that Israel's actions are a response. We think they are a continuation and acceleration of an agenda of ethnic cleansing and a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. That's what we think. And I think a lot of people across the world think it.
Richard, the Taoiseach was very categoric over the weekend, saying that Shannon Airport isn't being used to transport any military equipment to Israel or to in any war at all. Do you not believe him?
I think that we don't know unless we inspect them. Do I trust the US military with their military aircraft to tell the truth to the Irish authorities about whether they're carrying weapons? I absolutely do not. I absolutely don't trust the United States military to tell the truth about these matters, because they're lying to the world about the character of the conflict that is going on in Gaza, where there is a massacre going on, and Joe Biden has supported it. And again, I invite people to honestly, that's why the motion is long, because I invite people to read the words of Joe Biden himself, where he said, and I quote, "Israel is the best $3 billion investment the United States ever made. If Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. We would have to station tens of thousands of troops in the Middle East." And what does that mean? What does that mean, right? That means the United States' support for Israel is about its strategic self-interest, and it's willing to arm it to the teeth. And by the way, he has repeated those words very recently. Those words were originally from about 10 years ago. He repeated them in a press conference in the last few weeks during this conflict. So I honestly think, there's an onus on people to look at what they're actually saying themselves. Look at what senior officials in the Israeli military and the Israeli government are saying themselves about what their agenda is here. See what the Netanyahu and Smotrich and Gallant, what they said before October the 7th about what their intentions were to further ethnically cleanse the West Bank. I honestly think people have a duty and responsibility to look at these things, and we will be arguing that the government do have a legal duty and responsibility to look at those things under the Genocide Convention that they ratified. At the very least, we should start to have that discussion.
Just on a separate matter, can I ask you what People for Profit make of the social welfare legislation that Heather Humphreys bring into Cabinet this morning?
No, I'm afraid I've been a bit distracted on everything else.
In relation to the job seekers benefit and introducing a sort of sliding scale?
The job seekers benefit. Yeah, broadly the principle is a reasonable principle, that there shouldn't be a massive drop in your income after you may lose your employment. So yes, we're broadly in favour of that principle. We'll have to look at the detail of the legislation to see, but I think, but I would also add that combined with that, we think that and I've argued consistently, that all social welfare payments need to be brought up to a level that brings people above the poverty line. At the moment, all social welfare and pension payments are below, or the vast majority of them are below what is deemed to be the at-risk of poverty threshold. So we think that all of them should be brought up, but yes, if people have mortgages and so on, the idea that they would, if they lose their employment, their income would just collapse, where they wouldn't be able to make their mortgage payments or other sort of, important, necessary payments they would have to make because they're dropped down to a pitifully low level of social welfare. Yeah, insofar as it's attempting to address that, we agree with the broad principle.